Let me call the meeting to order. This is a scheduled workshop called and convened this evening, May the 18th, 2021. See, when you're retired, you lose track of time. So if you've got dinner, Andy wanted to go ahead and get started on the parts he wanted to run through real quick so we wouldn't look up while we're eating. So we'll turn it over to the administrator.
Well, busted, I guess. Before I get started, Mr. Mayor, couple things I wanted to say. First, what you're about to see tonight was just a tremendous amount of effort from your finance staff in particular. They have worked diligently on this and have just done a fantastic job. But the rest of your department heads as well have done a great job. I want to thank them personally, from my perspective, for just helping me with all of the little silly questions that I've had as we've gone through line by line by line to help explain things, and sometimes explain things 2 and 3 times because either I wasn't listening the first time or just didn't fully understand it the second, and it was probably a combination of both. So thank you, department heads, for all your work, and of course, David and Susan, thank you for your work on this as well. The other thing is, if in executive session, I tend to float a little bit, so if I start floating and walking towards the screen, just bear with me and follow the bouncing ball. What I wanted to do tonight is just go through a brief presentation that will give you an idea of where we're going with this budget this year. Some of the things that you're used to seeing are still there, but there's a couple formatting and financial differences this year that I want to cover and make sure that we have plenty of time to discuss and get your feedback on so we can make the necessary adjustments before we go into first reading. So with that being said, we're going to roll right into it. The first thing we're going to talk about is the general fund, Fund 11. And the major part of any budget in particular is going to be personnel. Well, as we've looked and listened to what we know the needs of council are, certainly the needs of our departments in order to serve the city, we're recommending 11 new positions in this particular budget, 3 of which are new titles, positions that we've never had before. The first one would be a project manager in administration. The role of that person we envision as we have gone and grown in scope and complexity of our projects, having someone dedicated with some construction management knowledge and certainly some financial acumen to help keep projects on track, on budget, and on time is becoming more and more evident as the years progress. We, just from a staff perspective, outlined about 3 or 4 projects that we know we've actually got budgeted in this budget that needs babysitting, for lack of a better term. And as we've gotten more complex, we need that particular oversight. You're also going to see 2 new positions, a commercial plan reviewer and a residential plan reviewer in this budget. Both of those are BDS positions, and they're going to be brand new. These are these roles had previously been contracted out. Where the intent is to bring them in-house. Along with their commercial plan review or residential plan review duties, they will also assist in the field as necessary. So those are 3 new positions or 3 new titles that we've got this year in the budget. But we're also including the addition of 2 public service worker 1s, a public service worker 2, a safe neighborhoods corporal, a patrol corporal in PD. We are going to we're asking council to add a groundskeeper and an athletics coordinator in this budget, and make sure my math's right. That's it. I think I covered them all. But one other thing that's a little bit different in this, oh, well, here they are. I did put them on here. But the important thing to look at this is in the athletics coordinator is a Fund 9, which is our recreation fund position, so it's not a general fund position. Moving into this is a new program that we're looking into this year is a quick response vehicle program for our fire department. I'm going to throw this chart up here just by way of reminder to show you how our calls are breaking down, not only in Greer from a fire response standpoint, but just this is a nationwide trend. Fire departments are quickly becoming all hazard departments. And as you can see, the bulk of our calls are rescue and emergency medical service calls. The intent of this quick response vehicle program is to bring in both a combination of part-time employees and overtime employees to man a SUV, which we've got in our fleet now, for 60 hours a week between 7 a.m. and 7 p.m. Monday through Friday. These are the high impact times that we've identified that would best be served by a QRV. The intent, of course, is to look at not only how we're using our vehicles, of course, but being in a better position to respond accordingly to the types of calls that we've got. So in your budget this year, you may, if you look at last year's overtime budget and salary line item budget in the fire department, you will see a significant increase, but that is to man this QRV program. And at any time, stop me and ask questions. And yes, sir.
Going back to the project manager,
Yes, sir.
what does the person do if there's no projects? And I guess that's kind of a loaded question. Will this person also be, we don't have a maintenance manager, correct?
Yes, we have a maintenance supervisor that really handles all of our. He's a working supervisor.
Not a manager. You've got a maintenance
foreman, for lack of a better term.
Okay. I think it would be, because when we can't remember it, what was the fellow's name that worked for the construction company that built the place? And you went to Bill. Bill. And he was our maintenance manager. But I think it's important that we have somebody looking at not only these projects, but also, we've got the chiller system too. And if those systems aren't managed, and all the other things that go under that, then we wind up with some really expensive repairs. And this goes back many years ago. Our headquarters fire station was heated with a boiler system. One of the best that you can have, but nobody managed to maintain it. So that system is still sitting up there in that big room. But I think it would be proper for that to include that into the job.
Yes, sir.
And then QRV, and correct me, Chief, if I'm wrong, it's my opinion that the counties have failed to keep up with growth. And they have been more than willing to hand off their responsibility to local fire departments. And, and this didn't begin yesterday. This was many years ago when it all started. So the QRV program, I think it's worth the cost of the counties to say, we want you guys to buy into this a little bit financially. I don't expect anything out of that, but who knows? And then the other is, if we are running short of manpower, and we don't have a volunteer program anymore, I don't. Why don't we look at that as volunteers? I mean, because you're picking up the extra slack. You can either have you want to use those volunteers. I mean, I know now you have to. There's different accounting that you have to do with the IRS required and so on and so forth. But
At a volunteer, just be clear, you're a volunteer program to man the QRV for medical response?
QR, sure. I mean, that's lot of places in the country, that's the way it's done, the old rescue squad. Now, and I'm not saying I'm just saying, is that been looked at?
Okay.
Covering all the bases before we go spend lots of money for taking up somebody else's slack.
Understood.
Who would man, I mean, to Jay's point, would that typically be a certified EMT? I mean, we're not going to send.
Right. Yes, sir. If it's okay for me to speak. So we have actually looked at a lot of different avenues for trying to increase staffing. We're actually working with the Harley Bond Center, and we've actually got a couple of interns that are working on that. We're trying to increase that capacity as well. So we are looking at different ways of doing things. In our area, across the country, but in our area specifically because of the growth and your base from which you get pulled from, there's not as many people who are willing to come and volunteer their time, especially putting forth the efforts that, for the training and stuff like that. That's not to say there aren't any, but there's just not as big a pool as there has been in the past. So, but we are looking at different avenues for that. And Mayor, to your point, anybody that would be on the QRV, just like we have on all of our apparatus, they're a minimum EMT. And then we do have those that are advanced as well as paramedics. So the idea would be that we would use QRV during peak call volume hours, which would help reduce some of the call volume on the bigger trucks. But more importantly, the QRVs are a lot more maneuverable, a lot quicker to be able to get in and out of areas, things like that than the bigger trucks. But the fact of the matter is we run about 40% of our call volume is concurrent calls. So that means instead of having just one call at one time, we're having multiple calls back to back at the same time. So about 40% of our call volume is concurrent. So we're looking at different avenues to try to offset the growth, or at least slow the growth of staffing, because quite honestly, with the current facilities we don't have anywhere else to put staffing. So that's again why we're looking at peak hours versus trying to add more people on shift and stuff like that.
Are we still using the early alert triage system or whatever we were using a while back that I think the county had initiated, where calls that come into 911 go through a checklist before it's dispatched?
Yes, sir. It's called EMD, and we've made some changes with the way the new CAD system came on board and all that, where we used to look for keywords and things like that whenever we took calls in our dispatch. Now, any kind of medical call is automatically transferred to the appropriate EMS dispatch agency. They go through and do the EMD process, and they identify those calls that require first responder response, and they will then send those out. In the case of Greer County, they actually drop the call directly back to our dispatch center from there, so there's no telephone call or anything like that. So there's no additional delay, but they do send that directly to our dispatch.
Thank you. Mr. Merriman, I want to echo Mr. Arrowwood's comment about management on the projects. I think that it would be helpful and beneficial if part of their responsibility was helping us create some sort of maintenance schedule or plan looking forward on our facilities, because we're 10, 12 years in on this building. We've got other buildings that certainly exceed that, and we'll be acquiring new buildings, and from a budgeting standpoint, having a 5-year, 10-year maintenance plan for roofing and for floor replacement and heaters and air conditioners and all that kind of stuff would be beneficial, I think, and that certainly I think could fall under that person's purview.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
And philosophically, I want to agree with him as well too on the county, because I think more and more they are willing to allow cities to assume responsibilities that that they're not willing to provide. And certainly it falls to us to provide a quality of life that our residents have come to appreciate, and who in the past may not have known that that was partially or entirely a county responsibility that we now find ourselves toting the load for. So from roads to EMS to whatever it is, I think that what we'll find is they will gladly give us anything that we're willing to take, and I think it needs to be noted.
Yes,
Thank
sir.
you.
Thank you.
Just like to make a note to Mr. Harewood's point, it's a little technical, but using the term volunteer, we all think of, volunteering time. In today's, governmental market with fire departments, there is really no volunteer program anymore. As they come on, they are compensated, so they're at that point, technically part-time employees. So that's where you mentioned about trying to get some savings through volunteer, but there really wouldn't be any because they are compensated.
Why? Okay, that's why would there not be any savings if you're paying a part-time person that is basically the pool this sounds like you're going to pull it from is individuals who are already EMTs, paramedics, or firefighters somewhere else, where they work for us. So they're not going to come at a greatly reduced compensation to spend however many hours. So when you say they're volunteer and you have to compensate them, how much do you have to compensate them?
From the regulations from the IRS and the Department of Revenue, any compensation at all. So we used to do semi-annual stipends, and this change occurred probably close to 10 years ago.
Yeah,
that went to compensation now. So when they come on shift, they were just paid an hourly rate.
Right, but who sets the hourly rate, or who sets the amount they get for that particular time?
As the organization, we would set an hourly rate. So using the part-time staff would save us money versus using our own full-time staff in overtime. That piece would save money.
No, I
I'm just
understand
saying,
that.
in terms of volunteers, it's really not feasible in today's IRS and Department of Revenue market.
Yeah, but if you're setting however much you pay.
Well, the market's going to determine that to some regard.
Well, maybe so, but they're still volunteer organizations, volunteer departments that I'm sure they're paying little to nothing. And I'm not saying to do that, but I think that there's a few things that I've heard for 30 years, but more than 30 years. You can't get people to come out and do volunteer for anything anymore. There's so much going on. I've seen, and not our present chief because he hasn't been here that long, but I have seen fire chiefs across the state say, "Oh, we've got to go to a fully paid department because we can't rely on volunteers. Cannot rely on them because middle of the day they got to work." Well, yeah, but they've always had to work, and so nothing's really changed. Finding people who are dedicated to do it. I'm just saying we need to look at all that before we say, let's spend X.
We'll get creative. I understand. Yes, sir. In this budget also, from a Fund 11 personnel standpoint, we have included in this budget 1.23% cost of living adjustment, or the COLA, and a 3% pool by which we can distribute merit-based increases based on our performance management system that we've implemented this year. So you'll find that as well in the budget. The next is our health benefits. We just got our premium information yesterday, David, is that right? And we're still working through what those numbers are going to be. By first reading, we will have not only those numbers, but a recommendation on that. But at this point, we do anticipate an increase in both employer and employee costs in our health coverage. But again, we are, from a staff perspective, still working through that, and we're doing everything we can to keep it manageable. Now let's move on to Fund 10. And obviously Fund 10 is the capital equipment, or the lease purchase, as it's affectionately referred to by staff. It's been rather confusing for me, just because anyway, that's a longer story. But the big ones in this particular budget is obviously you can see a frontline engine for the fire department. Chief did a fantastic job in February when he met with. When we all met with council in the initial kickoff workshop, explaining not only the present state of equipment, but his future needs. As we drilled into this, we think that our recommendation is certainly for a frontline engine for this year. Also, what you're going to see in public services is a compactor and trailer for public services out at the recycling center. Now, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put an asterisk beside the compactor and trailer at this time. We have budgeted for those things, and those things are needed, but those expenses very well may either may come out or may get pushed off a little while as we work with our current contractor for solid waste. So there's a couple things that staff is working on to mitigate those costs. The other thing is you have two more public services pieces of equipment. We've got a knuckle boom for picking up our yard debris, et cetera, those larger items, and then a mini excavator that we hope to assist in our street repair program that we're going to get into a little bit later. And then, of course, we have 7 police vehicles in this particular fund. Those are the large, bigger ticket items. Of course, we've got other things in there as well, and I think they're outlined in your budgets. But if you have any other questions about that, we're happy to answer. The contingency fund, Fund 8. This is just a maintenance issue where we are transferring $207,000 from the general fund to our contingency fund. This is just to maintain our financial policy that we maintain 1% of our general fund in contingency. Recreation Programs Fund. This is more this was a housekeeping cleanup kind of issue, but in the past, both Freedom Blast International Festival have been kind of hodgepodge from different departments or different funds for no other reason than as it's organically grown, it's just happened that way. But what we've done is consolidated all of the funds, 9, 11, and 18, and for those expenses back into Fund 9. 11, of course, is General Fund. 18 is the Hospitality Fund. So we will, if you're looking at your budgets and you see some what would have been drastic changes from year over year, it's explained in some transfers. The Neighborhood Services Fund, Fund 13, of course, this is money that we get an allocation from the hospital annually. What we have been doing is putting that money into the Neighborhood Services Fund, which is Fund 13. But part of that money is designed to be used for community health and wellness. So what we're recommending in this budget is to begin transferring money from 13 to the Real Property Fund to begin really in earnest our programming and design and ultimately construction of the South Tiger River Trail System. We're calling it the South Tiger River Trail System purely as a placeholder. We don't know what it's going to be called when that time comes, but we are starting to assemble property and get things rolling on that particular project. It's going to be a great wildlife corridor and educational opportunity, plus a recreational opportunity that really could be a marquee asset for the city. And we heard from council loud and clear in February that this is the route you want to take. But I think this is a wise use of those funds. Hospitality Fund, as you can see, 98% of this fund is debt payment related, and what we've got out here below is just where the bulk of that funding is going for the Hospitality Fund.
You got 98 there, and your transmittal letter, you got 90%. So is it 90 or 98?
It's 98. My transmittal letter was, I didn't go through and do the math, so it is 98. As a matter of fact, Susan did it today, so it's right. It's not administrator math or Susan math.
Where do we stand on the revenue budget year to date versus where we had projected that we would be as far as?
For year to date, we can look it up, but the last time we looked at it, it was 1.5% over budget. We're bringing in more than we budgeted. We did not see the decline that some of the surrounding communities do.
Real property fund continued. We've also got $1 million program from Greer Relief. As y'all remember, when Greer sold the hospital, it was always kind of an earmark to set aside money for Greer Relief as they are rapidly outgrowing their space that they're in now that they lease from the city, and to get them into something that's more suitable for their efforts. And we have partnered with them. They've been a great community partner of ours, and we want to continue that partnership. So we're asking in this budget to actually program the money. So more of a functional action by council to say we will be using X number of dollars in this budget for this particular purpose. The other thing is we've got the Turner Park restrooms as a match. We have matching money in there for restrooms at Turner Park. Again, these are just big items that we're really kind of trying to cover for you today. You also notice that we're programming the gateway signage of $120,000 plus $516 for the recycling center, earthwork paving. If you've been out there recently, you know that we've got crumbling pavement. We've got some retaining wall issues at the hopper and the compactor. We've got a number of just site improvements that can be done out there. So we are programming money to do that too. But again, I'm going to caveat that statement with the fact that as we work with our current provider, we may have an opportunity to move those funds, or that be a different number, specifically a lower number. But we remain to be seen. Then, of course, we have been working with ADA improvements in various areas, so we are programming $50,000 to continue those efforts. Facilities fund. This is simply put, we are trying to upgrade the event hall technology for, we're seeing more and more remote meetings, and of course more and more in-person stuff as well, to be able to do technology in our event center as an asset to our rentals. And then we have noticed and have had to take some action on the deck is rotting and failing, the underskirting of the deck over at the Cannon Center. And so we are estimating somewhere in the neighborhood of a $250,000 replacement for that deck over the Cannon Center.
Is that deck wood? Or?
The decking is Trex, but those parts, the structural parts are wood.
How old is that? That's only
10, 11, 10.
About 2010.
Treated material has a lifespan double that, so we know why it's decaying.
Do you have
I think your point that you made earlier, getting someone on board that can help us maintain our facilities and retreat would go a long ways in preservation of that.
I think that is smart too, I get a schedule.
But what?
To answer your question, I don't know why it's rotted. We just know that it has. And honestly, quite frankly, I think it was the same boat when we had to have this replaced too. It should not have decayed to the level it did in the amount of time it did, but it did.
But I think that goes along with what he was talking about earlier, that we need to have somebody in place that can help identify that ahead of time.
Yeah, a $2,500 adjustment to the underskirting of a deck is better than $250,000 complete replacement if it can be caught and rectified in time. Fully agree. The Fund 57, the Greer Golf Course, just by way of reminder, when the golf course was purchased, the pro forma indicated that we would have a 5-year kind of in the red period. In theory, the first 2 years, we would operate at a loss. Year 3, in theory, we would have broken even. And years 4 and 5, we would have tried to pay back years 1 and 2 with revenue made in those years. Well, as we have continued to deal with COVID and ongoing improvements to the golf course, we're seeing a shortfall in excess of $142,000 beyond what the pro forma had, us being behind. So what we are recommending in this budget is a transfer of $142,000 from 11 to Fund 57 to cover that shortfall.
With the purchase of the golf course, we purchased a lot of event space. How does that event space, the rental of that event space compare with the rental and demand for the other event space that we currently have?
We've just hired an assistant general manager, who is responsible for marketing and getting out. We've had some meetings there, but we can do a lot more. So I think technology is an issue there. We don't have the technology downstairs. If y'all recall, we had to bring all that in when we met before with the budget retreat. So again, there's still some improvements that need to be made. So it just depends on what type of meeting wants to be held, in that space or in those spaces.
So is there a demand for it?
Not so much, not yet. I mean, there's some, but not as much as we would like. So that's certainly a goal of ours.
Yeah, we need to make sure that's a big number one goal. That's a big.
Well, yes, sir. And to be quite honest with you, the sucking sound that you hear from Fund 57, we're hoping to get locked up and shut down real quick and turn it around. So it is a priority of your staff to figure out how to get this thing turned around quick. But again, with the improvements we're making out there, the efforts of staff, I think we're going to put together a plan. And then, of course, just going back to the South Tiger River Trail system, once we get that thing up and running and start generating some excitement around that, I think that can only benefit the golf course, the facility itself. So we're going to continue to work on that. But yes, sir, we hear you loud and clear.
Did I see that we're advertising for a new food vendor out there?
We are. I believe we open those bids tomorrow, I think, or Thursday. And that was because the current vendor has had some major health problems. And he's also having trouble finding part-time staff.
Okay, thank you.
So that was a quick run through of the funds, the major funds. Of course, we didn't talk about, for instance, the stormwater fund, but there's no major changes or expenditures coming out of those funds. What I wanted to get to now is to kind of talk about the big thing that is going to draw the attention, of course, of council and your constituents, is a couple philosophical things that we're looking to do this particular fiscal year that, in my estimation, in my judgment, I think is the way we need to start going as this city continues to grow and expand. In years past, we have our budget has grown and it's been managed fantastic. But I think what we need to do now is really dedicate millage for certain activities. So what you see this year is we are asking council to kind of have 3 dedicated millage pots, for lack of a better term. Of course, we'll have our operations millage, which was by and large everything we've gone through, a debt millage of 3.8 mils, and an infrastructure millage of 5.3. That infrastructure would be, of course, the old paving fund. We're still internally discussing what we're going to name it, but we are asking council to consider going this route. And of course, you'll see the big 100 below it is reflective of a 2.2 mil increase, 1.1 in debt, which would cover all of our general obligation debt, and our infrastructure, which was our paving, sidewalks, et cetera. And I'll go into a little bit more detail about that here in the next few slides. If you'll recall, of course, this is not an eye chart. It is a chart that David had put together for your February workshop, but you can see just a little bit of just a comparison of our millage compared to the population growth over a 10-year period. Our millage has remained the same since 2011. I think it was 2010 council made the last millage increase. Was it 10 or 9, David?
It was
Coming out of 10 was the last millage increase. But that's just a give you an idea of how we're growing. But the next one also is important because it does show that the growth of a mill. So while this chart may look like we're not keeping up, the fact of the matter is the growth of the mill is becoming more valuable. But when we go back to consider the first slide where we discussed having those different funding pots, the infrastructure pot, the debt service pot, in order to achieve what we're hearing council want to do, we've got to actually start dedicating funding and be willing to take those steps to increase taxes to whatever level to go specifically to those particular needs. In our operations millage, you can see here that the 90.9 mills represent ad valorem taxes, which is about 50% of that pot. And then, of course, all of our license permit fees, fire revenues, et cetera, those things go into that operations pot. The next one is the debt service millage, which contains all GO bond debt. And this is an important one because it'll fluctuate year over year based on not only our audited financials, but projected debt payments. So we can actually project out what those increases, or in some cases, as the years go on, could potentially be a decrease, would be. And so that puts council in a position to say, yes, we recognize that next year we know we need 1/10 of a mil in order to continue to cover these projected debt payments. We'll just go ahead and make 1/10 of a mil increase in the debt service and leave it at that. Same thing with the infrastructure millage. This 5.3 mils is to cover paving, sidewalks, et cetera. Now, it's important to note that what we've got here, and there's a little bit of, not a little bit, a lot of method to the madness on the coming up with the 5.3 mils, is that we have increased the paving budget by $750,000 for a total of a $1.4 million investment in our paving budget. And this is what we want to do is maintain the PCI 57. Again, this is not for any other reason than illustrative purposes only. But if you'll recall, Steve was so kind as to take his crayons out and put his engineering brain to helping us with this PCI. But what we've done here, do you see this purple line here? That 57 is that purple line. And that is designed specifically as our control budget. Effectively, what we're talking about is at the funding level we have got presented to you today, that would control the fall to 57. PCI, the acronym is Pavement Condition Index. We've always called it Pavement Quality Index. But the Pavement Condition Index at 57, okay? And then it'll flatten out at that 57 on out at the rate we've got it funded. Where right now is the control is we're at 61. At PCI is at 61. So what you'll see is it's in this purple line right there is a 1.1, almost $1.2 million in order to maintain that purple line. The 1.4, of course, would be for sidewalk work, et cetera, and just additional stuff that'll come along as we continue this. Steve, is there anything else I need to point out? This is, of course, is something that's been of interest to council. We have discussed this at length. I think I hear council say that we need to be better about maintaining our streets and infrastructure, connecting sidewalks where sidewalks can be connected, making sure that we've got the funds to do the work that needs to be done. And in order to maintain and get us to a level where we can continue that, we've got to start funding it. And that was the purpose of asking for the additional 1.1 mils in this fiscal year's budget. This is another chart that may help explain a little bit of the method to the madness. But what we're hoping to do is to keep this red from shifting left. All right, so this would, in order to kind of help you understand, we're in pretty good shape from our average condition right now, but it deteriorates quickly if we're not staying on top of our maintenance. So this is a projected outlook of what we could be facing if we did not take the time to and take the will to invest in our infrastructure. Steve, is there anything else? That's right.
The graph's just left, which is worse condition. So, we want to keep our roads at the current level they are, and we got to fund to keep them up.
And that, of course, is assuming the $600,000 a year that had been funded in years past. We are substantially increasing that.
When did we, since 2004, we started increasing some of the, over the match money, right? They, at some point. But when did we stop increasing that?
Trying the last several years, as the money has come in from Greenville County, we've been setting aside additional money or budgeting additional money over that match for the last 2 or 3 years at least. Before that, we were just funding the match. It may go back a little further. I'm just going off of memory, but the paving fund budget used to be in the 350, 375 range, and then the last couple of years we were around 600,000.
And that was total payment, right?
Yes.
Including the match.
Correct.
There were a couple of years where we got more money from legislative delegation. There was more money coming to the state budget to do paving, and then that went down. And we were still matching, but when it went down, it's been, like David said, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, we brought our level down to continue to match. Then we started losing ground, so we bumped it up above it, so that we were putting in 200,000 more than what we were getting to CDC.
Just to be clear, this chart is not gospel. And I say that to say that this is an engineering estimate of where we should or could be based on current levels of funding. But what has not been done on this particular in this particular exercise is actual application. So it's like anything else. We're projecting what that could be at the current state of funding, or at least what we know at this time. And if we go to an additional funding level at what we're projecting in this budget of $1.4 million, we anticipate this purple line at a bare minimum maintaining at 57. But you guys will have the flexibility in the years to come as we continue to monitor this and see where we are to adjust accordingly the millage dedicated for this particular end. And that's an important part of this. Is I don't want to come across as that we're using this as the guideline that is the end all be all of how we're going to pave. It could be that this isn't adequate, but we got to start somewhere, and this is the good baseline that I think where we need to start.
So is this millage then projected to be that line?
This millage is, yes, sir. This purple line, if we funded it at $1.2 million, from a projection standpoint, we would control the descent to 57, your pavement condition index number being 57, and then remain at 57. We're currently at 61. Now, again, this is a policy decision. If you want to fund it at the level to keep us at 61, we can do that, and we have an estimated price tag of $2 million to do that. What we would like to do is get us to that purple line, and we'll see what we can do, and then we'll look at it year over year. Now, if we want to come up with the whole whopping $42.8 million, man, we can pave every street and sidewalk, but you're not going to hear anybody up here recommending that.
Well, I think we've demonstrated in the past that we understand the concept of road maintenance. I mean, that's I think Wes Wagner scared us all to death with his charts about what was going to happen to our roads if we didn't do something. And so I think we've been trying to stay up to par with that. And I almost hate to say it because I just railed against the county about not holding up their end of the bargain. I'd like to see us not only maintain our roads to an appropriate standard that our citizens like to see, but I would hope that at some point in time we could get in the position, and it may be that we supplement this somewhere down the road with either a development fee or through development agreements with the builders, that we can begin to address some of the road issues that we have even beyond our immediate control, so that we can begin to work with both the county and the state to address some needs, because our citizens don't understand the difference between a city road and a state road and a county road. And I think if we could make plans that eventually, down the road, that we could begin to offer some relief in that regard, that it'd be appropriate for us to do so.
Yeah, I agree that the council has always made a big effort to fund road improvement. And there for a while I know there's two different evaluations, but the evaluations were really good, and our percentage of roads that were bad or was really low. But and I'm going to be a broken record. We've got to have not just a staff policy. I believe we have to have some sort of ordinance that comes before council that says if you make these road cuts, and I truly believe that's where most of the issues come from, that you've got to not it has to be patched back in a manner that one, it just doesn't look like a bunch of postage stamps, but also it gives a smooth ride, basically. The engineering practice that tells the folks how to fill the trench, fill the hole, that's something that our engineer should have. But as far as how much street to repave, or how big of a spot do that we patch versus the hole is cut, I think that would be something that I believe is critical for me to support any millage increase. That it's because it does us no good to spend money, or good money, basically after bad. Having somebody come in and cut the road, and it gets a postage stamp. And there's examples of that all over the city. And so I think that's important. And then to the mayor's point, I believe that we need to at least make the effort to go to the state and the counties and say, let us watch over the roads that are in our city. And when utility contractors come in and they open up our roads, they have to close them back to, at the very minimum, your standards. And if you agree, if our standards exceed yours, then they have to close them back up to our standards. And because our citizens, they don't know. And the great example always is Pine Street. Look at Pine Street, it's a state road, but it runs right through, a neighborhood.
Yes, sir. This slide was it. So again, council, what I had intended today, we've accomplished, is to really hit the high points of the budget, certainly the things that have the largest price tag. But the budget that you have in front of you is balanced. It does have a 2.2 mil increase in the budget, but your staff has gone line by line and adjusted the budget accordingly. And so we just offer any kind of direction and feedback from you today in advance of first reading. With that, I'll turn it over to y'all.
Council, floor is open for comments, questions, discussion.
Well, I agree with Councilman Airwood about the road cuts and that, because, I mean, that's just like throwing money out the window. You know, I mean, if we pave a road and then allow contractors or CW or whoever to come in and cut that road that we've used taxpayer dollars to pave, and then it's not brought back up to the standards that we had there in the first place, that's just a waste. And we need to have something in place, you know, that holds their feet to the fire.
What is everybody knows that our tax bill is not just made up of millage. There's fees. In the next, so in this budget, we don't have any increase to other fees. Is that right? Solid waste, stormwater.
Solid waste. Yes, go ahead. I was trying to get in our network real quick. About, I think 2 years ago, we passed with the comprehensive fee schedule at that time, either 4 or 5 years, Mike may remember this specifically, of $6 increases per year for sanitation. And if I'm not mistaken, we have this year plus one more year to reach what we passed several years ago. So there's $6 per year. $6 per year increase in sanitation per household.
How about stormwater?
No increase on that.
And that's all the fees, correct?
Other than some ancillary recreational fees or things, the facility rental fees, but.
No, I'm talking about tax bill.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's all in the tax bill. Yes.
So in the budget that you've given us, the millage increase amounts to a total of?
Right, about $400,000.
$400,000. Okay, thank you. Others?
So how much of that is 400,000 is the 2.2 mills? How many mills we're dedicating in this budget to road paving or infrastructure?
1.1 to the infrastructure, 1.1 to debt service.
So 200,000 for road paving.
Yes, sir.
Plus what that's an increase of that would be a $200,000 increase over what we budgeted last fiscal year.
No, sir. No. What we have done is pull, what was that? No. Let me make sure I understand your question.
We at least at the minimum have matching funds budgeted.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes.
Now, so you've got that in there. Should have plus some, unless that was, to help keep up then this new millage. Is that right?
This new millage is in addition to, yes, sir, what we have done in the past.
So we're $500,000. Is that what we would have in there?
Well, no, the 1.4 million total is paving funds. And that's what that 5.8. I'm doing my math there to make it a little right there, 5.3, excuse me, 3.8 mils for that, 5.3 for infrastructure.
So
if I'm understanding part of the question anyway, last year's budget, we funded a transfer to the paving fund of $450,000.
Okay.
This year's is $948. So almost more than doubling the transfer and then dedicating the millage to that piece.
Okay, I got you. So what we would be doing is in the budget this year, and then if the millage increase passes, we would say in ordinance form that citizens, we are going to take 5.3 mils, whatever that value is, and that will be dedicated towards infrastructure.
Yes, sir.
Won't go anywhere else.
Yeah.
And if we want it to go somewhere else, it'll have to come before council.
Yes, sir.
And how do we define infrastructure?
The intent in this particular case, sir, is roads and sidewalks. And if you want that clarified when we draft the budget ordinance, we certainly can do that so it doesn't get caught up in some sort of nebulous funding pot. But the way we've looked at it this year, specifically to match what we've done in the past in our paving program, is for streets and sidewalks. But by doing it in this way, we've actually pulled all that millage out so it's reflected in what we're going to use it for.
So we were doing 4.2 mils for streets and sidewalks.
We'd have to do some math on this.
What's the value of the mill?
A little bit under.
This year, it's about 180.
Yeah, about that.
Okay, so 4.2 times 180 is
With the
600 something thousand.
Two and a half mils using today's value on last year's transfer.
I thought that had the value of the mill at 152. Where did we get
That number on that slide was from last year.
Last year's adjusted numbers.
So it went from 152 to 180?
Uh-huh.
Why that large of a jump?
In general, as the value of the houses
Median
being
value
built
of
are higher,
houses.
it drives the value of the mill higher.
And how often are they doing just the reassessments?
Both counties are every 5 years, so we see a reassessment every 2 to 3 years, depending on the county. And we were in reassessment this year in Greenville County.
They're just not on the same schedule.
They're correct, not on the same schedule.
I know we've had a massive growth in our area, so many new homes, townhomes, all being constructed. All people coming in from across the country bringing their automobiles and all with them. Well, what kind of increase do you see in that, or is that all kind of compensated with the services that have to be done? Does it give us a larger income, or does it just give us more responsibilities to add with them?
Little of both.
Yeah,
Some of both.
it's like anything else. It's a little bit of both.
And in general, automobiles decline in value.
Yeah.
So all things being equal, you should see a decrease in tax revenues from vehicles. But because our population is growing so fast, we are actually seeing increases in taxes related to automobiles.
But
And a pretty significant one in this budget.
Correct, yes.
But the flip side of that coin is that the amount of money that we do get from the county, and we're back to the county again, was locked in 15 or 20 years ago at a set amount, and that pot of money has never changed since then. So as the county grows and the municipalities grow, that money simply just continues to be split among the municipalities. So we're not realizing any growth off of that fund.
It's just a fixed amount, not a percentage?
It goes on the fee, doesn't it?
The road fee, yeah, the $15 road fee.
Per vehicle.
But the way the county calculates that, though, is that the money that is on the Greenville side is is a number that was a fixed amount of money that was going to be divided among the municipalities, correct? Spartanburg County returns everything per vehicle back to us. Greenville County proportionately distributed based on that fee or that formula that they had. But it's not ever changed. Am I correct? It's correct.
Okay, make sure I'm clear. Our budget out of the general fund that we transferred last year to road paving was, what amount?
$450,000.
Okay, so if all things go as presented, this next budget, we would have funds for infrastructure, sidewalks, roads of how much? 1.4. Okay.
And of that 1.4, 948 is the millage equivalent.
Yes, the millage equivalent.
What do you mean it's the village equivalent?
The 5.3 mills in that breakdown, that equates to about $951,000.
And what did you say roughly last year we were dedicating in millage?
2.2.
2.2?
Mills, yes, sir.
So what's the balance come from? I thought we were doing total millage dedicated to that.
It's not covering the entire fund, but of the millage that we are dedicating, that's covering the taxes coming in. There's Greenville County road fee and some Spartanburg County road fee for the projects that we get from that side. And then
CTC money.
CTC money.
That's the balance.
And some possible development agreements coming in.
We're getting $197,000 from the legislative delegation this year, and then the rest of it, the difference is made up of what comes in from the road fees from the two counties.
So 5.3 equals how many dollars?
951.
Yeah, 951,000.
And did I hear you say something about going up $500,000 every year on that? You were speaking. You said something like that.
$6, he was saying on
$6 for sanitation.
On sanitation, no, wait.
No, I'm
You're
talking
about, no, sir.
When you were at the podium.
Yep, so it's, make sure I get back to that slide. It is right here, under debt service millage. It can fluctuate year over year based on projected debt payments. It had nothing to do with the infrastructure. That's why we wanted to carve out the debt and carve out an infrastructure pot. So we can prepare and actually have council has set aside general obligation debt that you can project what we know what those increases are going to be. It could be, I don't know, a tenth of a mil, 2/10 of a mil, whatever. But every year when we come back, we'll be able to tell you what the debt service millage will be on a year-over-year basis. Either way, we're paying for it. So if it remained the way it was before, and we didn't have two separate pots, the debt service is what the debt service is. And so we're going to have to adjust it at some point. If we know that we're going to have to continue to make projected payments on debt. If it stayed in the general pot that we've always pulled it out of, something's going to have to give. And we don't have to cut so deep because we rely on the growth of the mill, or we start carving it out and actually making dedicated millage adjustments to debt year over year.
So if you need to increase debt service millage,
That's all you do.
next year, you're not advocating raising millage, you're taking that you're taking another bite out of the total.
In years past, we would have. Yes, sir. What I'm suggesting in this particular budget, and the approach going forward, is we now have, you almost look like, you look at your debt services, that 3.8 mils, and if it needs to be 3.9 next year, that's what gets raised. It doesn't just go into the the whole millage is not being raised, just the debt service millage to cover what we know we're going to have to pay in debt. It's a dedicated source.
Just making it prospect of raising millage every year?
In some cases, yes, sir. Or in some cases, depending on what it comes out, lowering it. But what ends up happening is we're just pulling, we're eating from the pot. We're ending up pulling from operations at some point anyway. Because at some point that millage growth is going to level out. And we're not going to be able to live off the fat of the land anymore. And so once that happens and we have to start making debt payments out of a flattened millage, something's going to have to get cut, but our growth is going to continue. And so that's where I have to pull from general fund, operations, you name it, we're going to have to get creative. So the intent, yes, sir, is to pull out the debt service and focus on that specifically and to make adjustments to that and to that alone.
But now I'll make sure I'm understanding. If you have, and let's, the millage that we are dedicating to roads for debt service, if there needs to be an increase, it's not a millage increase overall. It's whatever dollar amount that we're going to need, and then that gets converted into mills for the increase. Is that correct? Okay. So it wouldn't be 3.4 mills or 1.1 mills. It probably would be like point something.
Oh, yes. I mean, David, correct me if I'm wrong, but the intent would be to specifically adjust those villages only incrementally. It's not going to be just a random increase just as a catch-all. If we know that our debt service is X, and we know that a mill brings in X, a proportionate share of that one mill, be it 1/10, 2/10, 3/10, or whatever, would go to that particular use. And our recommendation to council would be this year, fiscal year 23, 24, 24, 25, our debt service millage needs to be 3.9. Needs to be 4.0. Needs to remain stagnant at 3.8 because the growth of the mill is catching everything else. That's entirely possible too.
And it could be, because we would be setting that as dedicated millage, we would may have to adjust it every year, either up or down. But that doesn't tie us to say the rest of the budget has to increase either. We could say, all right, if we're going to increase debt service by $100,000, we're going to go over here in the general fund and decrease it by $100,000 somewhere. Okay.
It's your budget. I mean, let's be clear. It's your budget. Our recommendation is to do two things. One, we're getting expansive in our scope. And this, to me, is an opportunity to focus how we're using that money and to be, especially on the big ticket stuff, for you guys to be able to keep a better handle on it, and certainly from an accounting standpoint, keep a better handle on it. And to make incremental adjustments from a transparency standpoint that doesn't just get thrown into a bucket. You can go to constituents, I can go to, as a taxpayer, I can say, okay, well, nobody likes a tax increase. But I can tell you now that 2/10 of the mill is going to these two particular pots, and it's easy to track.
So my understanding, we're talking about millage increase as well as a trash or service fee increase. You mentioned $6, is that correct?
That was passed a couple years ago.
In
18. So it was an incremental increase over the years.
So the new infrastructure funding, does that get us to a maintenance position or an improvement position?
Maintenance.
So that's not nearly enough
No,
to
sir.
make it, to improve it.
But at the rate we're going now, let me get back to the eye chart here. If you'll look, get my big buzzer here. As this green line is what we're funding it now. Okay, what we're suggesting in this particular budget is arresting that fall at this level here and then maintaining that level. At a higher level, with more funding, we could potentially go up. But what we don't know is what the application of this is going to look like. Actually having $1.4 million to put towards the paving program, what kind of impact that would have on our PCI. And I, I hate the Nancy Pelosi approach was, we're going to pass it, then we'll see what's in it later. That's not the approach we're taking here. But the fact of the matter is, there are so many unknowns in this that what we do know is that the current rate of funding is unacceptable and unsustainable. And then what we've got here is a relatively low number of poor and failing roads will dramatically increase over the years because we just can't keep up.
To Riley's point, that millage wouldn't do anything for, what was the road we had to reconstruct? Brookshire, don't we have John Road, what's the other road, or we already done it?
West one, or
No, John Road goes down to the bridge off of 14 Phillips.
Yes.
Phillips.
All right, so that's not a funding mechanism for anything like that, correct? This is just, okay.
Could be. Could be a match. So for instance, the other day I say the other day, maybe a month ago, when y'all passed the development agreement with McElrath Road, and in the development agreement, it was to be put towards $150,000 for match for C-fund projects in Spartanburg County. That would go in this fund. As we work through these annexation development agreements, and we have pots of money, same thing with the $11,000 that was passed with our payment in lieu of for sidewalks for that particular project, boom, goes in this fund. Specifically set aside.
Yeah, I think that's going to be, we need additional funding. I'm not saying raise more millage, but somehow through these development agreements and creating another fund, and maybe making some sort of legislative agreement that says, if we're under budget X amount of dollars, then a percentage of that goes into this infrastructure, not necessarily on maintenance, but on actual construction. I mean, just like for instance, when we had to rebuild those roads, it put us in a much more positive position, I guess, because how many bridges did we maintain? A couple.
That's an excellent question. I don't really have the total number. That's on our due list as far as our asset management program is to get a list of all the bridges in the city and culverts in addition to that. So we don't have that list at the moment.
Does insurance pay if a bridge gets washed away or gets destroyed in some fashion?
Probably not.
Force majeure. We go to FEMA.
Yeah, and that might be something long term if we start putting together a budget for, because you're going to have maintenance on them, and I don't think they're.
I see this funding evolving tremendously in the years to come. Because we're only going to get more complex. Our needs are only going to become obviously more expensive and more complex. But I think this budget is reflective of just the changing dynamics of the city of Greer. It's reflective of our growth. Our numbers are staggering and only going to, aside from some calamity at the national level, we can expect growth to continue. We're on pace for what, 1,500 housing starts this year? Over the 1,100 we did last year during a worldwide pandemic.
And of course, those property taxes don't come online for quite a while. But I think what my lack of being at ease with this budget is there's so much. It's much different from what we normally see. There's a lot of new things, a lot of new personnel, and there's a millage increase, and there's a 7% increase in the budget, and the personnel expenses, bam, they're at 2/3 now, well above my comfort zone. That in a nutshell is where I'm not comfortable with this budget.
Understood.
And I don't deny the fact that there's probably a need for dedication of money to certain funds, but you said it yourself, we're still growing by leaps and bounds, and I don't know why that won't fund what we want to fund for the foreseeable future.
Well, how is it, let me ask you this, Riley, on the road pay. If we aren't keeping up now, what do we do about keeping up tomorrow?
I'm not opposed to 1.3 million, 1.2 million. I'm not opposed to dedicating that kind of money to road paving and infrastructure in general, but I'm just not comfortable with doing it with a millage increase.
I got you. What does that, millage increase, come out for $200,000 home, $250,000?
What's the value of about $17 annually?
Okay, so what's the average, value of a house in our city?
We've been using 150, but
According to the census,
more than that.
160 in the new census information.
We've been using 150, but it's slightly higher than that. But just, so that's 13, almost $14 annually on that's what 2.2 mils reflects on 160,000.
Hard to buy a house for 150 now, though.
Ma'am?
Hard to buy a house for 150,000.
Of course, that's taking into account all houses, right?
Yeah, yes. That's, the number the math I did was on a $200,000 house, and that's $17.60, I think. Is that about right?
I like those too, of course, I guess all of us hate to see an increase in anything, whether it's increase in your house payment or a car payment or whatever. My thing, of course, is coming out of the pandemic and everything with the economy the way it is, and everybody's expenses are going up. You know, when you go to the grocery store, everything's up, and you're talking about a millage increase as well as the service fee increase. So, I wish there was some way we could kind of lessen it. And that was my point when I brought about the rapid building and people, and lots of people moving here from out of state. Because most of the houses that are being sold apparently are to people that are moving here, are first-time home buyers. Because there's not a lot of existing inventory on the market to indicate that a lot of people here are selling to downsize or upsize or whatever. So, I kind of thought with the rapid growth that we're having, that it may have contributed quite a bit more to our income. And I'm sure that's the way that most of the residents, population would feel also,
Well, now, and I'm not saying yes or no as far as millage increase, but you do go back to 2010, it's our last millage increase. And prior to that, it was another 10 years. Is that 2000? Is that correct?
2001 or two, yeah.
And every time, that 2001 and 2010, it was a point of, we've got to do it or we're going to have to just completely cut services a lot across the board. I know 2010 was. 2001, I don't know if that was the same case or not, but.
Yes, it was.
It was. Okay. I think roads, our infrastructure is critical. But then this is a question the council's going to have to talk about. And we have said it before that we don't do growth for the sake of growth. We don't want to do growth on the backs of our citizens. Now, in this particular case, I don't think that we're at that point. Cost of service goes up.
I think one of the things that we need to consider is that, while we're all proud of the fact that we haven't raised millage in the last 10 years, we can't say that we haven't raised raised our income because we have. I mean, if you look at fees and some of the other things that we've done in lieu of the millage, one of the things we've got to understand is there have been some trade-offs over the last 10 years. So I don't think that we can say that we haven't done what we needed to do. We've just done it in a couple of different ways. I think it's indicative of the fact that we have assumed and rightfully so to some degree that the growth was going to pay for growth. But I think that we need to understand that while it may be sustainable now, it's probably not in the long run. And unless we continue to develop, particularly in, with some density, it's going to become a matter of what is it that we want to trade off. And I think that's the point that we're at right now. Do we want to trade off roads for something else in the budget? Or are we going to trade off additional positions? Are we going to trade off police officers or firefighters? Are we going to trade off recreation? I think that's the issue that we face now. And if I'm going to consider raising millage, I definitely would be willing to hang my hat on an infrastructure fund. I think where people can see the transparency of what we're doing makes it much more appropriate than just to say that we need to add $400,000 to the budget to balance it, or to begin to look at how do you reduce $500,000 out of a budget. So I think there's a lot of philosophical questions in this budget. It's not just a matter of are we going to raise the millage or not, because if it's not, then we're really back to the drawing board. So I think it bodes careful consideration about how we're going to move forward and what it's going to look like in the future. One of the things that this will probably tell us is how quickly we're going to need to move towards possibly development fees or some other offset that we've talked about. Because if we see, that through that infrastructure fund, we're not, through the debt obligation, that we're not bringing in, the sufficient funds to meet that obligation, then we've got an understanding at that point that growth is not paying for itself, and we're going to have to supplement it in some fashion. So I think that's probably a positive for us in terms of going the way that the budget's been suggested. Others?
I think too, though, that a lot's been said about the county, and I feel like the county doesn't have any skin in the game, because I'd like to be in that position where we're taking money out of the cities and saying, well, go ahead, fellas, you take that responsibility. I understand we're taking your tax dollars and we'll use them on other things that we need to use it on, but I think if we're representing our citizens, we need to, have that discussion with the county, that maybe that formula was good once upon a time, but just like everything else, times have changed, and maybe that formula needs to be looked at again. As far as, and I know they ain't gonna, what I'm saying, there won't be an interest in that, but on their part, why would you be interested in looking at that if you're not feeling any pressure, if you don't have any skin in the game? I think that's something too that we're gonna have to.
Yeah, it's a matter of leverage to some degree.
Well, just on the impact fee front or development front or whatever you want to call it. I mean, with the increase in the millage, we're talking about 400,000. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
And so, if we take the 400,000, which is just easy math, and we divide that by the 1,000, was it about 1,000 new construction? Was it?
Did 1,100 last year.
1,100.
We're on pace to do 15 this year.
I mean, you could also increase that amount of revenue by adding $400 per home that's built in the city too. if you're looking for an alternative source without increasing the millage, and that allows the growth to pay for it. And it's highly likely that to Judy's point, that the
It's gonna hit that.
adding traffic on the roads has a lot to do with the fact that the infrastructure is feeling a lot more stress and pressure.
Well, yes, that's true, but I do think that there's a lot to be saved by making sure our roads are closed up properly. You can go right down any road that hasn't been cut. I mean, it'll be there 15 years or so if it's asphalt. If it's cut and not, when it's cut, that 15 years of lifespan goes down, and if it's not patched properly, I mean, it could be cut in half or more.
Was that mentioned that we were gonna start doing the cuts and repairs and something of that nature?
Yes, ma'am, we are currently working with our partners at CPW to come up with an agreement on how that can be done more efficiently and save both CPW and the ratepayers some money and help the city maintain its own infrastructure by taking ownership of those repairs.
Plenty to consider, council. Other questions or comments before we wrap up this evening?
Perhaps this is an appropriate time to take a look at the incentives that we offer. Maybe back off on some of those, and that would fund a lot of this.
Mr. Bettis, and I think you guys maybe started to get an inclination of this when we brought some annexation discussions to play, specifically in some areas around Gap Creek Road is a perfect example. But staff's taking more of an aggressive approach to annexations themselves and what impact annexations will be having on our budget and our citizens, and of course the citizens that will end up living in the areas we annex. So you're going to be seeing more and more action, or at least requests from council or from staff to consider some policy changes on how we approach all of that. So yes, sir. Duly noted.
Well, I'd like to thank staff for bringing a new perspective to our budget and having us look at it in a different way. Because it's like I said, we can't continue to go like we've been going. We have to start to be more forward thinking with our roads and with our other infrastructure things. And I think this is a good start.
Mr. Mayor, Council, we thank you for your time.
Indeed. This is always a process, and our staff understands that, and this council understands that, and we will get this figured out. Unlike other forms of government, we are required to. So,
Hit.
So, with that, council, we stand adjourned.